The biting wind cut through the bustling streets of downtown as dusk settled over the city. Among the shadows cast by glowing storefronts, a teenage boy crouched by a street corner, his worn hoodie barely offering protection against the cold. His name was Marcus, a 17-year-old whose life had taken a cruel turn. With an old backpack as his only possession and hunger gnawing at his insides, he watched the world rush past him, indifferent to his plight. Across the street, an elderly woman struggled with her shopping bags, her frail frame bending under their weight. She paused, her face etched with exhaustion, as one bag slipped from her grasp. Groceries spilled onto the wet pavement, and the crowd around her moved on without a glance. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he observed the scene. Despite his own hardships, he felt a pang of empathy. Gathering his courage, he crossed the street and approached her. "Ma'am, let me help you," he offered, his voice steady but kind. The old woman looked up, her tired eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Little did Marcus know, this simple act of kindness would set into motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. Marcus had once lived a life of relative comfort, growing up in a small suburban neighborhood. He was the only child of loving parents who worked tirelessly to provide him with a stable upbringing. His father was a mechanic, and his mother managed a local diner. Though they weren't wealthy, their home was filled with warmth and laughter. But 2 years ago, tragedy struck. A drunk driver ran a red light, causing a devastating accident that took both of his parents' lives. At just 15, Marcus found himself orphaned and alone, with no close relatives willing to take him in. He was thrust into the foster care system. Unfortunately, the homes he was placed in were far from nurturing. Facing neglect and occasional abuse, Marcus decided he'd rather fend for himself on the streets than endure the misery of an unkind foster family. Life on the streets was harsh. Marcus quickly learned how to navigate shelters, avoid dangerous areas, and scavenge for food. Each day was a test of survival, but he held on to his parents' memory to keep himself going. "Mom and Dad wouldn't want me to give up," he often reminded himself, clutching a small, worn photograph of his family, the only keepsake he had left. Despite his circumstances, Marcus had a kind heart. He often shared what little he had with others in need, believing that kindness cost nothing. However, his resilience was beginning to wane. The cold nights and empty stomachs were taking their toll, and hope was becoming a scarce resource. That's why, when he saw the old woman struggling on the street, something stirred within him. It was a chance to do something meaningful, even if only for a moment. Little did he know, the old woman's story was about to intertwine with his in ways he could never have imagined. As Marcus helped the woman gather her groceries, she studied him closely. Her name was Eleanor, and her eyes, though weary, carried a spark of wisdom. "Thank you, young man," she said as he handed her the last apple. "You have a kind heart. What's your name?" "Marcus," he replied, brushing dirt off his hands. "Are you okay? That bag looked heavy." Eleanor nodded but hesitated. "I'm fine, but I could use some help getting these home. It's just a few blocks away. Would you mind?" Marcus hesitated. He had learned to be wary of strangers, but something about Eleanor's gentle demeanor put him at ease. "Sure," he said, picking up her bags. As they walked, Eleanor began to ask questions. "Do you live around here?" Marcus hesitated again. "Not really," he said, choosing his words carefully. "I've been moving around a lot." Eleanor didn't press further, but seemed to understand more than Marcus was willing to share. They reached a modest apartment building, and she invited him in. "At least stay for a cup of tea," she offered. Marcus considered declining but realized he hadn't had a warm drink in days. "Okay, just for a minute," he said. Inside, Eleanor's apartment was small but cozy, filled with books, photographs, and the comforting aroma of lavender. She handed Marcus a steaming cup of tea and motioned for him to sit. "Marcus," she began, her tone serious yet kind. "I'm not trying to pry, but it seems like you're carrying a heavy burden. Would you like to talk about it?" Marcus stared into his tea, debating whether to open up. Finally he sighed. "I've been on my own for a while now. Things haven't been easy. Eleanor listened intently, her expression softening with every word. When Marcus finished, she placed a hand on his. "You're stronger than you realize," she said. "And sometimes life surprises us in ways we can't predict." Her words, though comforting, left Marcus puzzled. He couldn't have guessed what she was about to reveal. Eleanor stood and walked to a small bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound journal. "I'd like to share a story with you," she said, sitting back down. "It's about someone I loved very much." Marcus watched as she opened the journal, her hands trembling slightly. "My son, Jonathan, was not much older than you when he faced hardships of his own. He was brilliant, kind, and full of dreams, but life dealt him a cruel hand. His father passed away when he was just a boy, and I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Still, he never let our struggles dim his spirit." Eleanor's voice grew wistful as she recounted Jonathan's story. "He wanted to be an artist, but we couldn't afford the supplies or classes. Despite that, he found ways to create beauty from nothing. He painted on scraps of cardboard, used leftover house paint, whatever he could find. I was so proud of him." She paused, her eyes misting over. "But when he was 20, he was diagnosed with cancer. We fought it as best we could, but the treatments were expensive, and," her voice faltered, "he passed away 3 years later." Marcus's heart ached as he listened. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. Eleanor gave him a bittersweet smile. "Thank you. It was the hardest time of my life. But Jonathan taught me something invaluable. Even in his darkest moments, he found ways to give back. He painted murals for our community, wrote letters to other patients, and reminded me every day that kindness can shine even in the face of despair." Closing the journal, Eleanor turned to Marcus. "When I saw you on the street today, you reminded me of him. The way you helped me without expecting anything in return. It's a rare quality, Marcus, and I want to help you in return." Marcus blinked, unsure of what to say. "Help me? How?" Eleanor reached for her purse and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check. "I've been saving for years, planning to use this money for something meaningful. I can't think of anything more meaningful than helping someone like you get back on their feet." Marcus stared at the check, his vision blurring with tears. "I can't accept this," he whispered. "Yes, you can," Eleanor said firmly. "Jonathan would have wanted me to do this. Consider it a chance to rebuild, just like he would have if he'd had more time." The weight of Eleanor's generosity overwhelmed Marcus. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of hope, real, tangible hope. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. "I'll make this count. I promise." Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining. "I know you will. And remember, you're not alone. If you ever need guidance, my door is always open." With her help, Marcus used the money to secure a small apartment and enroll in a GED program. He worked tirelessly, determined to honor Eleanor's faith in him. Months turned into a year, and Marcus transformed his life. He found a job, pursued his passion for writing, and began volunteering at shelters to help others facing the same struggles he once did. Eleanor and Marcus remained close, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. For Eleanor, helping Marcus was a way to keep Jonathan's spirit alive. For Marcus, Eleanor became the family he had lost. A year later, Marcus stood in front of a crowded community center, delivering a speech at a fundraiser for homeless youth. Eleanor sat in the front row, her face beaming with pride. "A year ago, I was lost," Marcus began, his voice steady. "But someone saw potential in me when I couldn't see it myself. That act of kindness changed everything. It reminded me that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a reason to keep going." As the audience erupted into applause, Marcus's eyes met Eleanor's. In that moment, they both knew that Jonathan's legacy of kindness had come full circle. Marcus's story is a testament to the power of kindness, resilience, and second chances. If this story inspired you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that compassion can change lives. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Together, let's create a world where every act of kindness makes a difference.